Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome back to A Dome of Ice and Fire, the web show all about how plot and theme accurate the episodes of Game of Thrones are to the book chapters they're based on. Sorry to go over this every single time, but I do feel awfully guilty when I inadvertently give stuff away. This series is not spoiler safe for later episodes and books. If you're not up to date with everything, you might be about to learn something you didn't want to know. You have been warned. Unless I'm forgetting someone, I don't think there were any new major players introduced in this episode, so let's just get on with the main comparison. The Lannisters rudely interrupting Arya's last dancing lesson before their planned ship ride home by slaughtering every Stark retainer in King's Landing. Syrio explaining to Arya that watching is not seeing the true seeing what is really there, not what your mind tells you is there. So Meryn Trant and his Lannister lackeys coming for Arya, trying to pretend that her father sent her, but Syrio having none of it. Syrio easily besting most of his opponents, but having a distinct disadvantage against a man in full plate armor and a real sword. Arya running a stable boy who was trying to capture her through with Needle. Bronn and Tyrion slowly making their way back to the Riverlands on the high road. I will say, while accurate to the original plot, this part of the story did happen a lot earlier in the book. The show is always played a little fast and loose with when it actually takes time to travel across Westeros and when it doesn't, though it gets infinitely worse in later seasons. Exactly the same thing with Catelyn falling out with Lysa and leaving the Vale, and meeting with Robb at his camp in the north in the same episode. Both happened, they were just spaced out a bit more in the book. Anyways, them getting set upon by the mountain clans of the Vale, but escaping death by Tyrion offering them upgraded +1 weapons and armor and eventual rulership of the Vale of Arryn. A disguised Varys coming to visit Ned in his cell and giving him the bad news that fuck you Catelyn Stark had already lost Tyrion, so there was nothing keeping the Lannisters from killing him, then chastising him for telling Cersei that he knew about her children's true heritage, explaining that Robert's death was a direct result of this, so he had as good as killed his best friend. Sansa being brought before the small council, who are undecided on what her fate should be and if she should still be allowed to marry Joffrey. Sansa, still being in the porcelain stage of her character arc, being more concerned about getting her dream wedding than the safety of her little sister, who she completely forgets to ask about. The Night's Watch bringing some dead rangers they found not far from the wall back to Castle Black to be inspected by Maester Aemon due to the irregular lack of decay on their bodies and new blue eyes. Mormont getting a letter from the capital about King Robert's death and Eddard's imprisonment for treason, and deciding to break the news to Jon over a drink, warning him that he's not allowed to leave the Watch to go and help his family no matter how much he wants to, and not to do anything stupid until he's calmed down a bit. Jon immediately doing something stupid, i.e. trying to shank Sir Alistair for insulting his father. That night, Ghost sensing something screwy going on in Castle Black and leading Jon to a wight that was trying to get to Mormont and kill him in his sleep. After a fight, Jon managing to stop the dead man from killing the Lord Commander by burning it, injuring his hand in the process. Naked Hodor! Bran visiting the Gods' Wood, meeting Asher the Wildling there, and talking about how the old gods aren't able to watch over their worshippers in the south because all their weirwood trees there were cut down. I mean, not to be superstitious, but she's got a point. Starks do tend to do very badly when they go south. The great Jon Umber getting some fingers bitten off by Grey Wind for threatening his human, which for some reason endears Robb to the slightly insane Northman. Sansa Stark sending letters to all her relatives dictated by Queen Cersei, telling everyone to roll over and play good for the Lannisters. Robb Stark ignoring this and heading south with his army. You conveniently never see the army in this show for budgetary reasons, but I mean it's a TV show and it was their first season, so whatever. Catelyn coming in on Robb doing war stuff with his head bannermen and telling him he should have given one of them the command because he's far too young, but also that he shouldn't because they need to respect him as the future Lord Stark, and if he doesn't win this coming war, everyone he loves is going to die horribly. Yay, good pep talk, fuck you Catelyn Stark. Tyrion arriving at Tywin's army camp with his new friends, Shagga son of Dolph, Timett son of Timett, and Shello of the Black Ears. As mentioned in episodes past, this was originally the first introduction we got to Tywin Lannister, but the conversation that he has with his son in this episode is still pretty damn book accurate, including a summary of the war so far, him recruiting the clansmen to his cause, and them insisting that Tyrion ride with them until his debt is paid. The shit that went down in the throne room is also pretty word for word, with Jaime Jaina Slint being raised to nobility, Sir Barristan Selmy getting fired and taking it badly, Sansa asking for mercy for her father, and Joffrey only agreeing if Eddard confesses his supposed crimes and confirms that he is the rightful heir to the throne. In his first step towards invading Westeros, Drogo raiding a village and capturing its people to be sold into slavery so he could buy ships for crossing the Narrow Sea. Daenerys, in a fit of guilt and compassion, claiming all the women she comes across being raped by the Dothraki riders as her personal slaves to save them. The riders complaining about this to Khal Drogo, who ends up siding with Daenerys because he's impressed with her increasing empowerment. Drogo receiving a wound that one of his new slaves offers to help heal, claiming her oath as a caregiver supersedes her aggression towards her tormentors. Syrio Forel, First Sword of Braavos, didn't just knock his opponents around a bit, he killed most of the Lannister footmen, using his wooden sword to break bones, shatter kneecaps, and gouge eyes. Like in many other occasions in this show, Tyrion and Bronn had their horses confiscated to make it easier to film. Here's an interesting one. On the journey, Tyrion willingly shares with Bronn the story about his wife and what his father did to her. In the show, Shae had to coax this out of him much later in the timeline. There's nothing in the book about Sansa and the Hound meeting during the attack, though I guess there's no real harm in establishing more of a connection between these two to make up for all the stuff that was left out of previous episodes. Bronn continues his path down the Legolas effect by making some funny quips he never would have had the sense of humour to make in the book. The show split Varys' visit to Ned in the dungeon into two for seemingly no other reason than spreading the plot exposition out over multiple episodes. Lord Commander Mormont was originally totally naked when he came out of his bedchambers to see what all the ruckus was in his office. Ghost did a lot of the white fighting in the book, though that was probably cut for the same reasons the horses were omitted. Working with animals is hard. A quick reminder that most of the kids in the show are aged up slightly, so understandably 15-year-old Robb occasionally showed childlike moments of vulnerability in the book. He confessed to Bran that the tough Lord of Winterfell act he was putting on was mostly fake, and he was shitting his pants when the Great John drew his sword on him and kind of went to pieces a little bit when he was alone with his mother. In the book, Tywin had unknowingly, ironically set up his temporary headquarters in the same inn that Tyrion was originally kidnapped in, marking the spot with the hanging corpse of the innkeeper. Shagga had a slightly more dramatic introduction to Tywin in the books, as the Lannister guard outside the door tried to stop him from entering, so he threw him across the room and snapped his sword with his bare hands. If this impressed Tywin, he didn't show it because the dude was like all poker face. In this episode, Sam claims that he read in a book that the White Walkers sleep underneath the snow and ice for thousands of years, then wake up to wreck shit, which is show only, and I know it's just dramatic mood setting and foreshadowing, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, there was only ever one long night event before this, right? How would anyone know what the other's hibernation habits are? Heck, it makes even less sense with the show's eventual explanation of where White Walkers come from. Drogo's wounds were somewhat worse originally. He had an arrow sticking through his arm and enough skin had been slashed off his chest to take his left nipple off. Probably still not immediately life-threatening, but it would have countered that meme that was bouncing around back in the day. I know I covered this already, but I just wanted to remind everyone that the Dothraki braided bells into their hair in the books. This was apparently experimented with in pre-production, but deemed too goofy looking for the show. I guess I understand that, but I will say somehow it wasn't stupid sounding in the book. Martin could make pretty much anything intimidating. Drogo got his fateful injury off screen, as it were, in the book. His riders complained to him about what Dany did, but none of them was stupid enough to challenge him to combat over it. According to sources, mostly Jason Momoa, this fight scene was added for much the same reason they added the Jaime Eddard duel. Too much build-up had been put into this character to let him die without at least one on-screen example of his prowess in combat. The no dreams and no flashbacks rule of Early Thrones comes into play again in this adaptation. In his cell, Eddard vividly remembers the tourney at Harrenhal, where Jaime Lannister was made into a Kingsguard, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen beat everyone in the joust, then caused a real political kerfuffle by giving the wreath of flowers he was supposed to give to his wife to Eddard's sister Lyanna Stark, which, without going into too deep a tangent into the traditions of Westeros, is a big no-no, as it's basically declaring that she was the most beautiful and worthy woman there. There's lots of fan theories as to why he did that, but I'll leave that to the conspiracy channels. We also missed out on Tyrion's dream about being a giant man beating the crap out of Tywin and throwing him out of an eerie sky cell. Martin was keen to show how much the dude hated his dad early on. Syrio told Arya the story of how he became the First Sword of Braavos. Oddly enough, it didn't involve swordplay at all, but I guess it wasn't really relevant enough to keep. In the book, after killing the stable boy, Arya realized her only way out of the Red Keep was to overcome her fear and go back through the dragon room and out the sewer again. To do this, she had to get get past a ton of guards stationed on the castle walls, and she did it by walking so slowly and calmly no one thought to stop her. The ninja power of nonchalance should not be underestimated. Sansa and the still missing from the story Jane Poole spent a few days locked in a room in the castle while the fighting was going on. While there, Sansa wonders why all this is happening. I mean, all she did was go to Queen Cersei in secret and tell her Eddard's plan to send her and her sister away. Yeah, the show changed it so she was completely innocent in the whole affair, being in the Tower of the Hand with her scepter in the lead up to the attack, but in the book, Sansa kinda sorta accidentally helped get her father killed. So keen was she to stay in King's Landing and marry Joffrey, she ended up tipping off his enemies that he was evacuating his children in preparation for making his move, allowing the Lannisters to get one step ahead of him. If you think it's a bit unfair that I'm not including a fuck you Sansa Stark for this, and for how easily she was manipulated into sending those letters to her family and being a big part in forcing Ned to make a false confession, I will remind you that at this point in the book she's 11. There's a big difference between a grown-ass woman fucking things up for everyone constantly and a child making childish decisions. The Night's Watch had posted a guard outside Jon's room in the book. Snow found him with his head twisted 180 degrees around when the Whites rose. The other dead ranger rose too in the book and was eventually brought down by the rest of the Watch, who hacked it to pieces, though unfortunately it took some of them with it. Before storming out, a very pissed off Sir Barristan Selmy told Joffrey he's probably living on borrowed time as the late King Robert's brothers would be coming to kill him soon. Joffrey apparently decided that was just going too far and ordered that Sir Barristan be arrested. "I'll do it, my lord. I'll send some of my best gold cloaks to apprehend the old geezer."
2 hours later.
Okay, so all the men I sent are dead. Apparently he had a small dagger and, well, maybe you shouldn't have fired him after all. He's kind of a death machine. Despite the show's insistence on portraying him as a meek child, around this time in the book, Rickon Stark started showing his first signs of going slightly, feral, something that would become quite serious in later books. Upset that everyone he loved was leaving him, he begins to spend more and more time with his direwolf Shaggy Dog, and both of them start lashing out at people when they try to get them to do things. The Blackfish Tully was in this part of the story too, as he rides from the Vale with Catelyn and joins Robb's army, becoming the head of his Outriders, the scouts that tried to prevent the main bulk of the army from being snuck up on. A small but I think important thing that was left out of this episode was the offhand comment from Tywin that the Lannisters had captured Harrenhal, the massive partly melted castle in the Riverlands. In the show, they were always talking about who was going to become lord there, Slint, Littlefinger, the Mountain, and not having read the books on first viewing, I was left a tad confused as to how anyone was going to become lord there, as they didn't own it. The book spent much more time with Eddard suffering in his cell, describing the several days he spent being starved of food and light. Not really surprising this was skipped over, as it would have been boring as shit in visual form. For some reason I'm yet to discover, Roose Bolton wasn't introduced in the show until season 2, despite featuring in the book and his house banners being present in the war meetings. There's a conversation between Robb and Catelyn that's left out of this episode concerning his first big move of the war, the details of which I'll save for the next episode when it would have come into effect. The very unlucky village that Drogo attacked and enslaved was already under attack from a different Khalasar when he arrived. Drogo's army destroyed them first, and he personally killed his rival Khal, the Khal's son, and his Blood Riders. It was from one of them that he received the wound that would eventually seal his fate. The Dom's final thoughts. This episode switched the order of events a bit more than average for season 1, though not in a way I would consider harmful to the overall plot, aside from the vastly reduced sense of scale the audience gets of Westeros. There's a lot trimmed off the events of the book, but it's mostly just that, the trimmings, the unnecessary parts that help build the world in the book, but would overload and bog down an episode way past the point of watchability. All in all, a good adaptation of these chapters in my opinion. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. Please remember that the YouTube algorithm is dark and full of terrors, and liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting can help hold it at bay. See you next time. Hello again, my beautiful watchers. I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a quick reminder that there's a wonderful website called Patreon that's been allowing online producers to actually make a living doing what they do, since apparently YouTube's decided that they shouldn't anymore. Basically, they offer the chance to pledge a certain amount of money per month or per video in exchange for various rewards offered by the creator. There's a variety of stuff you can earn by becoming one of my patrons, including early access to all videos and taking part in that survey you see at the start of every Lost in Adaptation episode. That's actually a very important part of the process, as I use it to gauge how much I'm going to need to explain about the book and the film before I start comparing them. If you decide to become a higher level contributor, your name will be added to the credits that you're seeing right now, and you'll be given the option to join my private chat room so you can regularly talk with me and other patrons. If you're keen enough to join the topmost tier of patronage, you'll earn the most coveted of all the rewards, the chance to pick a future adaptation to be reviewed by yours truly. However, if right now you are thinking, my goodness the Dom, I can't do that. According to the rather unusual laws of my country, I must defeat several alligators in Mortal Kombat before I'm legally allowed to support online content, and I'm afraid my reptilian martial arts are just not what they used to be. Fear not, it would still be a huge help to me if you were to give that like button the old clickaroo, share this episode on social media with perhaps a little recommendation to your friends to check it out, and subscribe if you've not already. It really helps my channel grow and reach new beautiful watchers. I hope you have a most pleasant day, and I will see you in the next episode.